to have another stream and record a new episode of the podcast. We're with our good friend Brad Smith again this week. Hey, Brad.
Hi.
Hey, Brad.
We're gonna get. Well, I hope everyone's ready to have some. I don't know if I'd say heated discussion about Space Marines, but certainly there's gonna be some talk about Space Marines. I think there's gonna be a lot of laughter.
Everyone loves talking
even
about
like-
Space Marines, right?
I thought I
I've
did.
convinced myself over the years that I like them. But do I like them? Maybe I haven't
Not.
thought long and hard enough about it. Maybe none of us have. I mean, what about them do we actually like?
I don't know. The idea
Oh,
that,
Pinheads.
yeah,
You're
nothing.
spoiling it. You're
Oh
spoiling
yeah.
everything.
So
No
yeah,
one's on here yet.
there's a lot to look forward to. I know.
Mhm.
I'm excited to talk about it. But I guess before we really get too much into that, we can start with the hobby happenings, hobby hoedown section of the Twitch stream, of the stream in general.
Hey, the real Broken Fingers is in here. Nice to see you here.
Oh yeah, nice to have you here.
Is that via YouTube?
It looks like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna mention you tonight, I'm sure. 'Cause you can't talk about true scale Space Marines without talking about your Alpha Legion.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess before we get into that too much, I haven't done that much work since our last stream. Our last stream was largely talking about Blood Bowl. I will say I started trimming Blood Bowl models, but none of them are assembled in any form to really show everybody. So I'm just showing this picture of the Bloodthirster that I'm continuing to work on.
You said you haven't done much in the last week. Joke's on you. I haven't done anything.
That's
Thanks, Greg.
anticipated.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I've been working on. Nothing too grand.
Bloodthirster's so
Hey,
grand.
Dave. Nice to have you here as well. So yeah, Bloodthirster's still happening. Eric, I know you've been
Yeah.
doing some stuff, right?
Slowly, I finally got out the Harvest lighter and started the paint scheme, which it's gonna be like a gray, so it kind of just looks like it's primed, but you have to believe me, I did more than prime it. I primed it, then I did some like black lining, and then I painted the base coat.
Okay, well, I mean, certain like the little engine turbines and stuff, they look different in color.
That's because they're just primed.
Okay. I hear
So-
you.
But
But no, that's good you're starting to paint it. I think that I'm
Yeah.
excited to see how it progresses.
I'm gonna
and-
try to use some chipping media on it and then paint like a lighter shade of gray, like a really light gray, and then use the chipping media to make it kind of modulate the color a little bit.
Okay, but not actually necessarily look like heavy rust or any of that shit, right?
No.
Yeah.
I'll probably then do like with the brush, do some chipping down to like the aluminum or whatever metal it is.
Did
I
you
doubt
first
it would-
paint it metal?
No, which I
Okay, yeah.
could have done that, but
That's
Maybe no.
probably good. Like, I feel the weathering will be important, but I don't think you want to go like overboard because sometimes, it's pretty easy to just want to go like whole
Mhm.
hog rust and damage and stuff, and then like it doesn't
I'll
really
probably do a lot, like a bunch of streaking, grime, and things like that, but not.
Yeah.
It- Oh, and hey, Into the Gray North is here too. Hey, nice to have you here.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And Johnny Lashley's here too.
All sorts of people.
It seems chat was not working for him in Twitch. Johnny, I'm not sure
Oh,
why, but it.
thanks, Twitch. Always there
Yeah.
for us.
Mhm.
But yeah, no, that's good that you're starting to paint it. It'll be good to finally complete that. I mean, we've had it for
Oh, long
10
time.
years or something.
Yeah,
It was one. It
it's
was
been a
one of
while.
those purchases. As soon as we purchased it, I thought it would stay in the box forever. It was like instant regret from purchasing it. You know the feeling. I'm sure we all
Oh
do.
yeah.
I just think it gets us one step closer to quote unquote playing true scale
Aeronautica, Imperialis. Hell yeah.
Oh my god, that would be incredible. That would be incredible.
Playing a game would be incredible.
Well, that
The real
too.
broken fingers say Space Marines bring the boys to the yard. It's like, oh yeah, everyone loves a good Space Marine. And
well, I mean, we have. I'm sure all of you know we have stuff to say about Space Marines. You've heard it before, but I'm hoping we have some new things to talk about that people will at least get a chuckle about.
I'm here to fearmonger. I want to fearmonger about Space Marines.
the little Space Marines are gone forever.
They're gone forever. Buy now. Buy now.
Well, they were in the supply drop. Shit. They're gone. Yeah. You missed your chance, everybody. They're gone. All truth. I don't know if that's true, but it could have been true.
It wouldn't surprise me if, they loaded up in a bunch of garbage.
Yeah.
Space Marines.
I think I saw one box had like a lot of the special character, like the new Primaris, like lieutenant guys, like for the chapters.
Oh.
And then like some random stuff like the wolves for Space Wolves.
Oh no.
Like they threw some of that stuff in there. That's the picture I saw floating around the internet.
Well, if it was just the wolves themselves, they're fine. But the ones that are that Space Marines are riding, those are not to be talked about.
Yeah, but it seemed like a mix of like stock that doesn't move.
That makes sense.
I think people
I'm sure that's it.
People are speculating that those characters are getting like into clamshells instead of boxes or something. I don't know, and that's why they're getting rid of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wouldn't buy them, but
yeah. Well, okay, so that's what we're working on. Brad, are you working on stuff? I remember last we talked, you were working on creating like chaos spawns.
Yeah, I'm still working on the chaos spawns.
I brought up a picture of the one you're working on.
Yeah, so you can see the head. That his head is actually glued now. It wasn't glued last week, and it's glued now. That's about all I did. Worked on some of the arms a little bit. I'm trying to go. I'm not going to be a perfectionist about these guys. I just kind of want to get them done. So that might be
probably good.
The true horror of these spawns is that
the lack of effort.
The lack of effort. So we'll see how it goes.
I mean,
true horror.
The last person, like, I mean, if you actually finish them, then that's like, oh damn.
Like, that's what I figure. I don't finish very many things, so
if they're actually finished, that's a significant accomplishment. Yeah. And Greg, I know you've already laughed a little bit earlier about how you've done nothing. And that's fine. So yeah, that's the hobby front for all of us.
I started reading some poems by William Carlos Williams. Who here remembers William Carlos Williams?
He's
most famous for the poem "The Red Wheelbarrow." So much depends on a red wheelbarrow, glazed with rainwater, beside the white chickens. That's my remembrance of the poem. I may have gotten it a little bit wrong. But Brad, do you remember that poem?
I kind of do. I remember it was in the one English class.
Yeah. William.
I remember it. Yeah, it's, for some reason, like I remember almost nothing about my schooling, but I remember that poem.
Yeah, I remember that.
I mean, I remember it so well, like I can still recite the poem.
Yeah, that's
one of his last books of poems. The first arc of it was all he wrote about some paintings by the Flemish painter Peter Bruegel, or maybe pronouncing that wrong. But he was like a follower of Hieronymus Bosch.
Oh, yeah.
And the style was similar. I feel Bruegel's paintings weren't as weird
Okay.
as Bosch's, but there was some weirdness in them. But the first 10 or so poems in his last book of poetry were about specific pieces of Bruegel's that it was pretty neat. Still on that, the simple style that Williams had, like the Red Wheelbarrow.
Legendary.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so I don't know. Do you think dare I say, we just get into the episode of the
excitement.
podcast? Yeah, the excitement. God damn, I'm excited.
Space Marines?
Space Marine.
Where's Marines?
Oh yeah, Space Marines.
I think I'm ready.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna be as ready as I'm gonna be. How's that?
Yeah, I mean, we made some slight effort to prepare for this, but maybe
Yeah,
not
we
as
did.
much as we could. But it's,
well,
you
hopefully
know,
it doesn't end in disaster.
I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah,
I'm sure it will be fine.
And I
All
guess
right, well,
I'll say, people in the chat, if you have things to comment on based on what we say, don't hesitate to put in the chat, and maybe that'll help spur our discussion.
Yeah.
Because I think everybody has opinions about Space Marines.
It's true. All right. Well, are people ready?
Yeah.
I'm ready.
All right. Well, I'm gonna start the music then. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dragged into Turbolasers, a Between the Bolter and Me podcast. This is episode 75, and I'm your host, Eric Wire, and I'm with my two brothers, Adam Wire,
Hey, everybody.
Greg Wire,
Hey, everyone.
and I'm excited to say our good friend Brad Smith is here. Hey, Brad.
Hello.
Yeah, well, and any longtime listeners may remember Brad from some of our very first episodes of the podcast. Like, I think in at least episode 2 or 3. I don't know. It seems like a lifetime ago, but we're glad to have him here to talk about something that's, you know, near and dear to everyone's heart who is involved with Warhammer 40,000, and that's Space Marines.
Yep.
So, yeah, like we thought we would use this episode to just kind of talk about some of the interesting aspects of Space Marines and how their design elements and things led to kind of the creation of, or people making true scale versions of them to make them larger or make their proportions more natural, and then how Games Workshop almost like responded to that as well by creating the Primaris Space Marines, and then also probably talk a little bit about what those Primaris Space Marines mean for kind of the true scale movement as a whole, and maybe what we might expect from them. So I guess with that, when you hear Space Marines, everybody, what do you think? Brad?
What do I think?
I mean, the first...
Go someone else. Yeah.
Yeah, not to interrupt you, Brad, but when I first think of Space Marines, I think of Space Marines. So,
oh yeah, so
I think
cool.
they're synonymous with to me, they're kind of synonymous with, like, almost like satire and humor. Just mainly because of how they've been portrayed over the years. But I feel also, I also think of them in like a more serious light where I try and imagine them as like a believable and a potentially real thing, and I think there is a lot of seriousness to them, and they've certainly been portrayed that way in a more intellectual light. But
sometimes,
yeah, sometimes.
Yeah, I guess.
Cool hammer.
I mean, to me, like honestly, Space Marines were the first thing that even got us into the miniature hobby. Like there was a little comic book shop that we would see on the way to school most days with a big cardboard standee of the Blood Angel Space Marine from
The
the second edition of Warhammer 40,000. And so that just was just cool to our young, impressionable minds as this sort of larger than life, iconic space hero thing. And I mean, I think they still kind of have that charm in a way. And it's something that I feel a lot of people probably were brought into the hobby just because of that general imagery. Um, not to say that that imagery is perfect, and even in this classic Blanche piece I feel a lot of the kind of caricatured wonky elements that have sort of been like baggage along with Space Marines for so long, their lack of an abdomen, their oddly sized heads, like all those things
It's all
are kind
here.
of
It's all
still-
here in this one image. Like, I certainly think back to it fondly, and it was one of the things that really drew, I think, the three of us into the hobby, seeing this weirdly
Why don't we
armored.
describe the picture a little bit for those who aren't seeing it?
Mm-hmm.
It was the cover to the second edition of Warhammer 40,000, as was mentioned, and it features a battle scene between some Blood Angel Space Marines and some Space Orcs. In the center of it was a Blood Angels captain with holding a bolt gun in the one hand, pointing it diagonally downward towards the left hand of the picture, and his other hand's a power fist that he has up in the air.
In a
Like,
triumphant pose of power and
Yeah, and
dominance.
he's not wearing a helmet. He has a rat tail.
a cool rat tail.
It's
Mhm.
like white hair. And the rest of the picture is cluttered with stuff. There's some other Space Marines behind him shooting their bolters, some Devastators to the other side with their heavy weaponry and stuff. And then some orcs fighting them. But these are orcs of the second edition, kind of wonky orc design, not what we know of Warhammer 40,000 orcs is now, where they look a little bit.
Yeah,
Well,
not the
it's
Brian
all
Nelson
weird.
design.
Yeah.
These
Yeah, I
kind of
guess-
have a comical look to them.
The picture that I think of, I guess, is the Crimson Fist one. I don't know. Was that
Oh,
like the Space
that's
Marine
broken.
Codex from?
Well,
The-
so that's been redone tons of times, but like the cover to the original like Rogue Trader rulebook was
Is this
like,
the one with the beaky helmets or the non-beaky helmets?
Probably the non-beaky ones.
So
I'm not that old
was
school.
maybe the third edition cover,
I think so. That's what I kind of think of.
which was like a redoing of that. But so yeah, I mean, I think they're all kind of cool in their own ways. But I think one thing, if for me, like, they brought all the colors and the guns and all this stuff brought me into the hobby. But I think if it had just stayed that kind of caricatured cartoon sort of stylized stuff, and if it was just that and kind of some wonky looking models, I think I would have probably lost interest in the hobby and kind of moved on to other things. But I think all throughout Games Workshop existence, they've tried to add a grittiness and realism to their things, and particularly with their Space Marines, they have a lot of cool artwork that isn't as stigmatized and destroyed by these weird proportions. And then authors like Dan Abnett and such kind of would I think helped make the Space Marine like a cooler thing, that it was so much more powerful and faster than humans and somewhat unknowable in their physiology and neurobiology and things like this, and kind of added a little bit of mystery to them that I think was more interesting. And I think by adding some of those elements to it, it made the setting a little bit more of an interesting place that I wanted to continue to explore. And ultimately, that, and some of that was get through like lots of great artwork that portrayed them a little bit more dangerous and realistically than some of the earlier models and such. Like there was an excellent Kev Walker piece that was, I think, in the 3rd edition rule book that has like, it's like a Black Templar banner bear
Yeah.
with sort of shooting, and there's some destroyed like Space Marines with their like shoulder pads all messed up. And like I think some of that, I mean, even in that Black Templar thing, his proportions, or at least you can see kind of see a torso there. You see like even the sickle magazine of his bolter, like the rounds are being ejected and it's the magazine isn't full, and some of that gritty realism there made it seem cooler to me and more interesting to explore.
May
And
this
I
be
guess
the only piece of artwork where a magazine for a Space Marine is not filled?
that is probably true. That is
I
probably
don't see the
true.
spring inside there, so that's a little weird, but
But, and I guess it was probably around 3rd edition. Also, they got Carl Kapinski was an artist that worked for Games Workshop for a while and would do a lot of cool artwork. And I think like Alex Boyd and Paul Dayton, all of them, I think, started to produce artwork kind of around that time, 3rd, 4th, 5th edition and such. And I think that was a lot different from kind of the classic small, kind of pathetic looking Space Marine model.
We talk a little bit about the Space Marine model, the older Space Marine models, which anyone who's been on our blog or listened to us complain for a while about Warhammer models will have heard us talk about this, but just very briefly, the old Space Marine models, they have almost no abdomen. It's like their rib cage is fused directly to their hips. That's, I feel, the biggest problem.
Yeah, I mean, it was just Goodwin, designed them, and it was like one of the first like really good multi-part kits that they made, and it sort of has been used for so long. It's been kind of revamped a few times over the years, but it's still largely stayed the same. And Jess Goodwin kind of made this pretty iconic illustration trying to show like the true scale and height of a Space Marine, and somewhat hilariously and labeled it as being like 8 feet tall, but curiously the scale starts at like 2 feet rather than 1 foot, so it's actually 7 feet tall. And I feel that like has had ramifications like for many years. I feel now people arguing over the height of a Space Marine, whether it's 7 or 8 feet.
yeah, this may be one. Like, I feel there are two main. I almost would argue there are two main things that have like really
Destroyed the fandom.
yeah, destroyed the fandom almost. One is the notion of the height of like a traditional Space Marine, and mind you, like anything, you'd imagine they'd be a range of sizes, but I think in general the thought is maybe they were roughly 7 feet tall. And yeah, there's a classic picture of Jess sitting on the ground next to a drawing of a Space Marine, and it's, as Eric said, it's labeled and it looks like it's 8 feet, but yeah, if you look closer at it, the scaling, it starts at 1 and goes to 8, so it's actually just 7 feet tall.
Yeah, it's kind of funny.
So if you didn't look closely at it, you just assume he was 8
and it's
feet
interesting
tall.
because even this sort of schematic that we're talking about, it even has like the helmet is pretty large, probably a little bit too large. His doesn't have much of an abdomen. He's not in the squat pose, but he certainly has his legs spread out maybe a little wider than you would often be. So I feel a lot of the things, the weird elements of Space Marines were already there. But I guess that kind of leads to this general thought. There's like a lot of awesome artwork from some of the aforementioned artists, as well as lots of cool background material and novels and stuff written. But that was very kind of opposed to what the Space Marines are actually like in the game itself. And ultimately, most of the models, like they're certainly not terrible models, but they look pretty caricatured. And particularly if you compare it to some of the newer Primaris Marines who have the proportions improved a little bit, yeah, they just look kind of laughable. And I think this weird dichotomy of being really cool in some areas and not so cool in others, like yeah, in the rules case, like the Space Marine is just what everything is measured by. There's like the Marine equivalent, like just 4-4. It's like so average. So nothing about a regular Space Marine inspires confidence in the game. They're not like in the lore and background, they're like one Space Marine is 1,000 other soldiers, and like hell no, it's not in the game. So like there's this big chasm between what I think a lot of people think a Space Marine is and what they ultimately were for a long time in model form, as well as in rule form, and honestly still are in rule form.
Yeah.
And I think it's because of that people started to have this desire to make like true scale Space Marines, in which they wanted to make them larger to and fit this image that they didn't really get from the models, particularly when standing next to like a Cadian shock troop. The Cadian shock troop is like as big as the Space Marine, and we'd probably struggle to even fit in the armor. And
Yeah. Like
even Games Workshop over time would kind of buck against this idea of Space Marines being sort of weak, particularly in the release of Inquisitor, the 54 millimeter game. They had Space Marines in that, and the rules for them, they were like very unbalanced, much stronger than any, like a single Space Marine could just kind of wipe the floor of all the other like heroes and stuff you might role play with.
Might that have been a time where people started to take Warhammer or some of it like more seriously and realistically, as Inquisitor started showing a little bit more nuance to the universe, and then Dan Abnett wrote like the Eisenhorn novels, and I mean some of that seriousness had probably been there before, but I feel like Inquisitor coming out with a ton of great artwork.
Yeah, and I think 2000.
Exploring all those things, exploring the notion that a Space Marine should be really impressive, and then showing that they are in those game terms.
Yeah, I think that's a good call, Greg.
No, I think you're right, because yeah, I guess like maybe a regular human strength was like 50 and a Space Marine was like 200, but then I think it was amplified by a bunch just because of the power armor.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, you're right, Greg, because like oftentimes if people are asked like how should I get into the lore and start learning about Warhammer 40,000, and people are all, like even Black Library points people to read Dan Abnett's Eisenhorn trilogy. And yeah, that was when I think Dan Abnett saw kind of the rule book and some of the stuff around Inquisitor. I think he was sent it and was like, hell, can I write something about this? Because he was sort of inspired by all this neat sort of stuff, and they're like, yeah, sure, you can do something. And he wrote those kind of classic novels that does expand the universe beyond just space heroes shooting demons and such, and add some more believability to it. But then even just in the lore, the artwork, like the lore expanded what an inquisitor was, and actually expanded that there are all these different factions within the Imperium, and made it actually seem that
You're
this
talking
sort
about
of
Inquisitor here, right?
Inquisitor. It made it seem like there would be a reason to believe in the emperor as a god, and that there were different sort of thoughts on that, and if he was still alive or wasn't, and all those elements and details lent to just making a more believable and interesting setting. And along with that, yeah, they made Space Marines more interesting too.
Well,
And
actually, so here's a question for you, Brad. When was it that you realized that the classic Space Marine model was pretty wonky in anatomical terms?
Oh, I don't know if it was the third or fourth time you guys complained about them.
So it was us, because I mean, it took most of, like, all through and through college. I don't think I realized it wasn't really until, like, I
I
don't know.
mean, we were talking about squatty Marines, I'm gonna say, at least when you like soon after college.
I mean, I think we kind of knew it to an extent. That, like, the thing that I was always excited the most about, like a new release, wasn't models, but just to see was there any cool artwork in a codex, because of that general understanding of how maybe Dayton made some new piece of artwork that made Space Marines look like what I thought they should.
I would say when your disillusionment happened, there was this I want to say it was like a salamander, like chaplain or something.
Oh my god,
You
Chaplain
guys bought him,
Savior.
and like you didn't even want him. You're like, his legs are all wrong. And,
Yeah, the
So
original
I don't know
model.
like when that, but I would say that was when like
That
I
was
still
third
kinda feel
edition.
like it wasn't until, like, really, maybe I was 28 years old or something. And I thought about, it's like, you know what? Holy shit, guys. Like, we always knew the Terminators, their anatomy was bad and the shoulders were up to their ears. But it wasn't until, I don't know, six years ago or something, where I looked at it and it's like, wow, they legitimately don't have an abdomen. Like, they just don't have an
Yeah, I
abdomen.
feel I just knew there was something kind of wrong there, but didn't.
When also
spend
that in general they
time.
were just too small, because the Cadian models were literally, the Cadians couldn't even fit in the armor that
I think
the
that's
Space Marines
something that
had.
I had realized, and
Yeah.
this kind of squatty poses was something I realized, but I don't think the full gravity of the problem hit until like 6 years ago or something. And when that hit, we didn't stop complaining about it.
Yeah, we didn't.
It's true.
but maybe we're we talk about scale. Maybe we're blaming the wrong thing. We say the tactical Marines are too small, but maybe the Cadians are just too big.
Yeah, I think that
They
is a big
are. They're
element.
too
Like
big. Because if you look at the Death Corps of Krieg and the Forge World Guardsmen, they are actually smaller than the standard plastic Space Marines, and they sort of work. So Forge World was trying to kind of agree with the plastic Space Marines, but Games Workshop was like, no, sir, we want them to be roughly. Maybe they just wanted them to be roughly the same size, because that.
I mean,
don't know.
honestly, it probably had a little bit to do. Like, they were probably still sculpting 3-ups and stuff, and then had to
Yeah.
like shrink them. Like, they didn't have the ease of digital printers and such. So like, once someone did something, it's not like, let's print it like a slightly smaller. Like, it's like, we have these. Like, oh, fuck it, it doesn't matter. Like, they're still nice enough models. Like, so I don't think it wasn't as easy in the past to kind of work with that. And there weren't as many sculptors as now. Like, there are a lot of things that, so it was somewhat of a product of the time. But I guess, admittedly, so all of these things, this sort of disconnect between what I think a lot of people imagine Space Marines being in the artwork and in the lore and such from the models and the rules was what I think led some people to start this idea of trying to correct that and make these like true scale Marines. And probably one of the first people to like really start doing it and like is relatively renowned for it would be Migs or Migsula from the kind of Iron Sleet collective. But back when we first really started to look and know his stuff, he had a blog called Legion of Plastic. And before this, he actually did a bunch of stuff, I think, on Daka Daka. But he made a bunch of really cool Alpha Legion, and I think this was some of the stuff started maybe around 2008, where he started to do some of these conversions, and obviously there weren't Primaris or anything like that, so he just did what had become sort of a standard thing, but would take some Terminator legs and with some green stuff and extensions and such, created like kind of his first like Alpharius model that was like really, really cool. And I think it was one of the first like plastic Space Marine models I remember seeing. It's like, that actually seems to somewhat capture more of what I thought of when I thought of Space Marines. And you can actually, if you type in Legion of Plastic and go to some of his first posts in particular, which were I think back in 2011, he has a bunch of work in progress stuff showing a bunch of his conversions, and like they're cool. They still really stand up. And honestly, I kind of wonder if I think this even sort of transpired probably shortly after the release of Dan Abnett's Legion, which was maybe the 5th or 6th Horus Heresy novel, which was about the Alpha Legion, their first kind of introduction to the Horus Heresy. And it's a great story that I would certainly encourage people to read, but it did a good job of kind of mythologizing and making Space Marines actually seem cool. And part of this was because most of the story is through the eyes of different like human characters and like human Alpha Legion operatives and stuff like that. But so yeah, Migs made a bunch of these, and I think if not the first, was certainly the one who kind of popularized this idea of taking Terminator legs, using some green stuff, spacers and things like this, and started to make true scale Marines, and then would often then make a lot of kind of henchmen and other operatives and such from, Cadians or other models. And ultimately, I think that was a good move to kind of emphasize that these were actually larger than kind of the traditional 40K model. And it helps convey this idea of a Space Marine being large and imposing. But yeah, and he has like a cool Alpha Legion with a heavy bolter. It makes the heavy bolter not look
quite as
like,
ridiculous.
Yeah, quite as ridiculous as they often are conveyed. But so I think, that was some of the first stuff that like I had seen and thought was like really neat and sort of captured my imagination as to what I wish Space Marines were more like. And lots I think has been done since, and even Migs himself started to experiment with different sort of conversions and such. And ultimately, when the Primaris, or not the Primaris, like the Forge World Primarchs were starting to release, he ended up starting to use a lot of them in conversions, and that's also done a lot as well. But that's certainly on kind of like a larger end for kind of a true scale Space Marine. But I think relative like a few years into our blog, we started to kind of consider the idea of making a cooler looking Space Marine. And part of our effort to do that, we wanted to even sort of start to consider what people were doing with Space Marines, because even as you started to make them bigger, there was somewhat of a difference in what Space Marines look like in some of the art. And as much as I love Karl Kopinski and his artwork for making stuff look a little bit more proportioned and believable, he did a very classic, iconic image of a Crimson Fist Space Marine that I
He's
think
walking forward, has a power fist. What was the 5th edition book? I don't remember which rule book. It was
I think it was fourth.
4th edition.
Yeah.
Like, the picture's great, largely except for one thing. His head is so small. It's like at least half the size it should be. And I want to say that this picture almost ruined Space Marines. When we're talking about, when Adam mentioned there are maybe 2 images that like have caused wars between fans, I feel the first one was what size are Space Marines, and that was sparked largely because of, or I think largely because of that mistake in the
That
height.
confusing image of Jess sitting by the 7-foot labeled 8-foot Space Marine. But yeah, this
And the
Kopinski.
second is this Karl Kopinski picture of that Crimson Fist walking forward, and his head so outrageously small.
Like, I feel like the whole notion of like pinhead sized Marines and big bulky power armor. I mean, there's probably other artwork and stuff that kind of brought about that notion, but I think this is certainly the most iconic. And I think there are certainly people who, like, when they envision Space Marines, that's what they're thinking of. Huge hulking armor, tiny head, maybe huge muscles.
This picture, Brad, like, what are your thoughts about it?
I think, like, when it first came out, I would say I liked it a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I did too, and I kind of still do, except
I mean, if the head was bigger, it would be awesome.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can tell Karl Kopinski also realized his error, because if you look at his other artwork of Space Marines, like, I don't think there are any other pictures that he's done where the heads are nearly as small. Like, he did a series of covers to some of the Ultramarine novels where he drew Space Marines, and like there's one of a Space Marine shooting a bolter in one hand, and then one of his hands was like blasted off. And if you look at that, his head is much larger, the point where it looks like, for the most part, roughly like a large muscled human could fit in a suit of armor, and it's not the pin-headed thing. So I think Karl realized that, you know what, I went a little too far in that one piece.
In some sense, I think part of it is even also goes back to just ease of modeling. Like, it sure is a lot easier if you're starting to make Space Marines larger. Like, it sure is easier to just use any heads that are available from other plastic kits rather than worry about trying to sculpt your own face or something.
But wait a minute, to jump back to that old picture, like we were just saying how Karl Kopinski seemingly realized his error and changed it in his other pictures, but the damage had been done. People remember that picture, and people still today are trying to make their own true scale Marines, where they put the heads like so very small. And then, I mean, I feel some people, their image of a Space Marine is more of a gorilla type person with anatomy that is wholly unlike that of a normal human. Now, mind you, there will be people like, well, of course it is. They have the 10 hearts and the
whatever glands.
Or whatever. They're so different. But I feel like the general profile of a Space Marine to me has always been a regular human that's just big and strong. And I guess it maybe wouldn't have to be that, but
Yeah,
I
and I
feel
feel
all
like that's
images portray them as that, and that's
yeah,
what they are to me.
yeah, and I think that ultimately leads to kind of eventually it ends up being like what are when people try to create true scale space marines, they're people just have different approaches and like what they want to achieve with the models. Some of it are like they want this really larger than life image, this just full bore action, ridiculous stuff, the pinhead, the gigantic legs, this and that, just to really that sort of ridiculous escapism. Whereas others, which are more like the camp we fall into, one the reason we would ever consider doing this was to help fix the scale, add additional realism, make them actually the 7-8 foot warrior in comparison to the human. And yeah, it was a way to add realism, which that isn't necessarily what everyone's trying to do.
Yeah.
And I mean that certainly is fine. People can do what they want. And like we said, some of the artists have changed over time how they represent them. Because I know Karl Kapinski, he took a lot of pains to try to make things scaled better, but certainly kind of failed with that one aspect of this Crimson Fist Marine, like we said. But it's still a cool piece of artwork. But
Well,
yeah, so we started to kind of sort of experiment with this and wanted to not just rely on heads that are too small and like really look at all this stuff, which resulted in us or Adam, you converted a few models, one of which was actually you converted an Alpha Legion guy for Migs of all people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that model turned out really nice, but then you ended up wanting to kind of with the next model sort of improve that even further because as everything in this hobby, like it is a learning experience and you learn things by making models and want to continue to better yourself. So I think
Yeah.
that led you to
Yeah, so I started off kind of the way a lot of people did back in the day with true scaling Space Marines, like taking Terminator components and then extending things and sculpting. And I feel it was with this model that I really started to
with
notice and see firsthand a lot of the issues with a lot of the Space Marine models. Mainly the notion, like the weird squatting, wide leg poses. Like when I started working on sculpting this model, like I had to do and redo so many aspects of it.
with
And
this model, the Migsula True Scale Marine, is that the one you're talking about?
um the model that I eventually used to make like a Thorn Moon Space Marine.
Okay.
Um, and so for that, it's like the leg attachments I like had to redo so many times. I had to make the waist much wider to actually make the legs look correct. I had to make the body wider, the shoulder pads wider, the arms larger, give them a more substantial neck. So by the time I was done with all of that, the model was so much larger than most other Games Workshop figures, to the point where it's roughly the size of most of like the Forge World Primarch models. So I think in my opinion it's too big, but in particular if you compare it to like the original plastic Space
yeah
Marines, like it's almost like he's patting the Marine on the shoulder.
on the head.
When, about the time that you were finishing up that Thorn Moon true scale Marine, which I believe was your second attempt to make a true scale Marine, that's when Games Workshop released the Primaris models.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
like,
it was.
oh, all these people are making true scale models. Well, like, let's release some plastic Space Marines that fix a lot of the complaints that at least we had about the anatomy. Like, they have abdomens now, and their poses for the most part aren't as squatting. And I feel like that kind of made it such that people didn't really need to do much with true scaling anymore. They could just
Yeah.
buy some Primaris Marines, maybe change their backpacks and bolters, and they had true scale Marines.
Yeah, it was interesting because it was like when we were having all this discussion with different people, like trying to sculpt this, spending all this time, and like I'm sure it was sort of ironic and humorous that within like a month or two, Games Workshop kind of completely changed the game and people's consideration with that by releasing the Primaris, which certainly added a lot of uh, discussion over the lore and this and like, oh, now they're different. But I think it was probably more than anything just a monetary move as a way to eat their cake and have it too. Still sell the old squatty Marines, but have new Marines and be able to still constantly pump out Space Marine releases.
Well, they're
By,
really
like,
really damned if they do, damned if they don't, right? Like if they would have just said these are regular Marines, like
People would have been upset.
it
that-
would have been the third schism, right?
yeah,
that
I
all
kind
of
of
their-
think what they did was the most reasonable thing, because that way people could still have their old thing, but they could, into the hell, they could still sell them. They wouldn't be replacing kits. Like it was the logical choice, even if I don't maybe like it as much, but
I
it,
think about like the Death Watch guys that came out right before Primaris and how
Mhm.
like they made them a little bit bigger and a little bit better. And then like I feel like they really got the wind taken out of their sails.
Or in like the
when-
Thousand Suns, I think they came out a little before that stuff as well.
Yeah.
And then they released the Primaris, and it's like, oh shit, I don't know why anyone would want the old Space Marines or the old Chaos models anymore, because they just look so...
Well, that's a question for you,
Pathetic.
Brad. Did you ever have a desire to make true scale Marines?
No.
Um, when the Primaris models came out, did you have a desire to like, hey, I could use these as Marines, or like, did that change your thought on true scaling and whether you'd want to do it?
I mean, I do like the models. Like, I have a tendency to buy things and never do things, and I have caught myself every now and then being like, like it'd be kind of cool to start like Space Marine Army now. Like they've got some cool stuff, and I almost had a Death Watch army. Like maybe I'll
I feel
give it a go with Primaris. Like
yeah.
If you
I
were,
kind of feel it was, as you mentioned, Brad. I think or at least for me, I know if I had been working on an army or whatever, I would have felt super deflated and defeated. It's just like, well, I'll put a stop to this. No reason to spend time on these anymore, because it just sort of destroyed any neatness of the Death Watch. Although I guess, admittedly, a lot of people, it was pretty easy to just take those shoulder pads, like Jeff Vader, Johan Erkikon's. I'm sorry, I butchered that name, Johan, but he made a bunch of great Death Watch Marines just by kind of doing that, adding the shoulder pads and such. But still,
Tons
like
of
if you
people
just
have, yeah.
invested with a bunch of models and then the Primaris were released, it's like, you know what? I didn't realize it before, but I see it now. Like that, they just look so much better. And I
They
feel,
do.
it made it such, it's certainly, at least for me, if I had any thought of buying a regular Space Marine, which to that point I really didn't, but it certainly was destroyed.
Well, I mean, I think when the Primaris were released, they were released in the Dark Imperium boxed game, and it's like there was just a very weird. The whole set I thought was very strange in that you had the Primaris Space Marines that overall looked quite good, like they had an abdomen, they weren't quite squatting, all of that, and then they were shown right beside the Death Watch models, which were roughly the same size because they made the models larger, but the anatomy was not better. So they still like really lacked an abdomen.
Nurgle, it's Nurgle.
Well, yeah, I guess you could make an argument that they're all fucked up because it's Nurgle, but
That's
to me
maybe
it
the
was just
lazy argument.
yeah, to me it was just so jarring. It's like
You don't think they were signaling the cool kids play loyalists?
I mean, maybe they were, but it's like
actually, admittedly, I
kids
think the
don't play.
Custodes were released right before the Primaris too, and they were also like
They
a thing.
were,
Like, hey, these because it's on like this. It's the same basic frame that they use as the Primaris. So I think all of that was slowly the Custodes and things were slowly leading to it's like wow, Space Marines could look better. But so then they released the Primaris, and when Dark Imperium was released, I think they were still really trying to convince people that no, like Space Marines aren't dead. We'll still have Space Marines, but we'll have these new, cooler, better looking Space Marines, but they'll be distinct. And I feel they kept up that run for a little while, but I think with the new Indomitus release, I feel it's clear, even though I think most people suspected, I think it's clear now that regular Space Marines are a thing of the past. They're not going to make new regular Space Marine models. Hell, when they were redesigning all the special characters, they're all Primaris. Like they're not going to spend effort to make those kind of bad looking models when they could just make them Primaris. And with the Indominus box, like most of the units in there are basically just Space Marine units that are Primaris size. It's not like let's make some assault Marines with bolt pistols and chainswords. So let's make some veterans with robes. Let's remake the bikes.
Well, so yeah, maybe in a few years.
Chaplain on bike has been gone for years, but like let's make a chaplain on bike now, guys, Primaris style. So like I feel.
Yeah. So maybe in a few years they will just say all the Primaris Marines are Space Marines, and then they'll make even bigger models and say that those are Primaris. And
but
I
it
feel
does make you wonder: are they gonna make like all normal Space Marine legends? Like, I guess they won't because they still want that.
What I envision is there'll be a lore thing where it's like all the old Space Marines have been wiped out, so now they're only Primaris except for the Dark Angels Fallen. And some of the traitor legions still in the warp.
And so they'll look as pathetic as ever.
But I mean, you joke, but I feel like something like that's gotta happen at some point.
But I mean, mind you, like they also release new plastic Chaos Space Marines, and like to me they're just laughable. They're bigger. They're roughly the size of a Primaris, but like their anatomy is the same. They have
My
no
army's
abdomen.
laughable to you, Adam?
Yeah, because you didn't
Yes.
assemble any of the models, and none of it's painted.
No, that's not why. That's what my stuff's like too.
The truth hurts, Eric.
Yeah.
The truth hurts.
But yeah, I mean the models are better. Like the newer Chaos models are certainly better than the old ones. Like better sculpting, better casting, molds, all that. But
I question why you would want
anatomy.
them though, because they still don't have a torso, and that
I don't even remember them very well. They're probably a little bit better than the old.
They are, but they still. It's obvious that they're not right.
Yeah, they're better, but not good. But I guess with the release of the Primaris models, it kind of certainly changed up how people do true scaling stuff, but it still was an interest to people people are like, I don't care for Primaris, I just want normal Space Marines, but I want them to look better. So what I think is kind of made now the general way people make a true scale Space Marine is just using a Primaris Space Marine, maybe
Yeah.
converted a little bit, like change the helmets or something, and that's about it.
Yes, and I mean that's by far the easiest way to go about it. If you still had some notion that you wanted to play Warhammer 40,000 and you wanted an entire army, that would be the thing to do.
And there are lots of good examples of largely doing that stuff. Hell, like Migs from Iron Sleep, that's largely what he's done now for his newer stuff, with addition to some like Primaris stuff. But then lots of other people have sort of done that. But there's certainly still room for doing some minor conversion work to, I think, sort of distance the Primaris imagery from the traditional Marine. Like there's certainly some design cues that make it clear it's like the Primaris armor. They have these little fins on their knee pads, these round things by their shins, and their helmets are distinct, all those things. And those are all little things that you could change without a huge amount of effort to like kind of make it apparent that you want it to be a traditional Space Marine.
Yeah, I mean, like that whole notion. More recently, I painted that Iron Snake Space Marine, and I feel, in general, the notion of trying to create a true scale Space Marine from a Primaris Marine, I think ultimately that model is roughly what, say, I would want in a Space Marine, where you spend a bunch of time and remove some of those Primaris elements, but that again takes a fair amount of time, and not everyone's going to want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there are still people that aren't using the Primaris.
No, yeah, despite the Primaris being released, there's still quite... people make their true scale Space Marines in a bunch of different ways, and I feel there are, I guess, maybe 3 main ways to do it. The first of which is probably the simplest, and that's to just use the Primaris Marines and modify them a little. And then,
yeah, like Migs did that. Certainly, Werner makes some pretty cool Black Templar. Like he's on Instagram. I think it's like E's or 3s essentially, and he has some really cool Black Templar models.
W3RH and 3R. W3RH and 3R.
I feel he has the coolest Black Templar around. For a long time, I had always wanted to make a Black Templar army, but I feel seeing his army of Black Templar has made me realize that I don't have to do that anymore.
But yeah, I think he does a good job of primarily just like using Primaris Marines, maybe changing some helmets, the bolters, backpacks, things like this, but painting them like, really well. And he still has also used a few of the Forge World Primarch models, like the Rogel Dorn one, to make a really cool chapter master, or I don't know, master. And admittedly, I think just looking at that chapter master next to the Primaris show that like even the larger Primarch models aren't that ridiculously larger than the Primaris. So I feel like it kind of works. So I feel that is, again, that's certainly a camp that you can fall in and make some pretty cool models by just slightly modifying the Primaris Marines. So I think that's certainly a thing that one could do. And certainly I think if you did want to like play in tournaments or play more games, make an army, I think that's the thing to do.
Yeah.
Where it's the most logical time sort of thing to do.
Yeah, and I feel so aside from that, there still are a ton of people who are still making true scale Space Marines, kind of more in and along the lines of what people traditionally did, with either
Like
taking
leg spacers or Terminators spacing them, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and so there are tons of hobbyists that have been doing this for a long time and have done like a great job of it. One that comes to mind, is the Real Broken Fingers. He has a lot of really cool like Alpha Legion Space Marines where that's what he has done.
And we actually had him as a guest on our podcast a few episodes ago where we talk about some of that stuff. And he also started a YouTube channel pretty recently, and he has some videos about how he sort of adds the spacers and such. And admittedly, I think a lot of people who I think are kind of keep this method, one of the reasons I think they do it is if you're interested in like the Horus Heresy and you want to maintain some of these armor types, doing kind of some of the extension, leg extension stuff, torso extension is a lot easier for that because you can still use some of the Forge World resin and keep those sort of classic different Mark IV, Mark III armor without having to like really go in and sculpt stuff to the Primaris. Because sort of with that in mind, the other person who kind of does this sort of style, the Anvils of Connor, he's a pretty big name in kind of the true scaling thing. And he largely does that sort of style thing as well. And he's a big Horus Heresy guy and big into kind of maintaining the different armor marks and things like that.
No, yeah, I mean he's done this on like a very large scale. Anvils of Connor making, in this case, most of what he's working on now are like Death Guard, Space Marines. But I feel the main additions that he really does is he focuses on extending the length of the legs by putting in a spacer in the shins. And they look really good. He's very, very talented at doing that and splicing together different kits. Yeah, I mean, they're great. And they're certainly...
I wish you'd extend those abdomens.
Yeah, like the only thing that I always questioned about his work, and it's, again, just like preference of what you want your models and stuff to look like. He extends the legs and they look great, but he maintains the really short abdomen, short to like torsos, so, and really typically pretty large heads. So I think it's kind of like a weird hybrid between like the old Space Marines and the newer, better scaled Space Marines. Their legs are certainly better and longer, but they don't really have a torso, which I always sort of questioned. But I mean, the models look great. It's just I really wish they had a real
I guess
body.
slightly going back to just making Primaris, using Primaris, I made some Dark Angels just kind of experimenting with like doing the least work possible.
That's true. Yeah.
And yeah, I think as we sort of suggested, it's not that hard to change just other plastic bolters, change helmets and that sort of thing. And like you can get a relatively nice effect. And I had a post about it somewhere, and I don't know, maybe I hadn't removed the knee fins at that time, which I have since gone back and done because I think that looks better.
I mean, you also had some like Raptor Space Marines that you painted where you essentially took a Primaris Space Marine, changed like the head, or in some cases changed the head, like the backpack, the bolter, and stuff like that. I mean, they look good, but I feel they still really do scream Primaris.
They sure do.
At least to me.
Yeah, they do.
So yeah, and then so those are the first two main types. Primaris, just use them. Second, use older Space Marine models, extend the legs, maybe extend the torso. And then the final, kind of like the final method, is either sort of sculpting it all yourself, making them a lot larger, or yeah, I guess in some instances just using the larger Forge World like Primarch models as a basis to make larger, more imposing Space Marines. And I guess the second true scale Space Marine that I had made for like that Thorn Moon Marine, and I also like painted a Black Templar Space Marine. That's kind of the notion of just sculpt the whole, most of the thing yourself, and you
Maybe
can
make
sort of
casts of them.
yeah, you can
and
sort of
modify those.
choose how large you want them.
And I feel one of the main people, when you think about doing that sort of thing, the person who first comes to mind when I think about it is Lunax 7070.
Mm-hmm.
And he's done a whole bunch of Iron Hands models, and he's even made some casts of them to make more. And very recently, he's actually started to make some pretty cool looking
Grey Knights.
Yeah, Grey Knight models based on some of the older artwork and such that sort of builds upon that as well. And this is sort of taking that scale and making them even larger and more, I guess, sort of terrifying looking. And I guess he made some converted some Sisters of Battle that I think with the Sisters of Battle are pretty tall. And I think these larger Space Marines, even with the Primaris, the Sister of Battles are kind of large in relationship to the Primaris. So I think there is some value in making them even larger.
Yeah, but isn't that a little bit like scale creep? I don't know.
Oh,
Oh,
it certainly is, and I think that's always going to be an issue because like people are going to be like, oh, well, all these cool Necromunda models are released. I'm going to use them to convert my cool cultists or whatever, and they're bigger than most of the traditional humans, so that creeps it up. Like the Sisters of Battle are taller and larger than like the Gene Stealer cultists, maybe. So like I think everything is just pushing towards this scale creep, which makes it all kind of difficult.
You know, like maybe somebody wants to make, if they're using a Primaris as like a regular Space Marine and they want to make then a true scaled Primaris, have to make them bigger because like one of the Goliath, Necromunda Goliath models, like they're bigger than a Primaris. They couldn't fit in the Primaris power
I mean,
armor.
I feel with the current scaling, the
Well, you see, you
Primaris.
need to make them Primaris size to fit those 3 new Primaris organs.
Oh my god. Yeah, we don't talk about that. But I mean, the new Sister of Battle models, I think they are a little smaller, a little slighter than a Primaris Space Marine. So, kind of with that in mind, like, if you really wanted the scaling to be better and you liked Primaris Space Marines, you would need to make something larger than the Primaris model.
An indication that GW is admitting that the Primaris were always just supposed to be the new Marines because they're basically the same size as the new Sisters of Battle.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, their armor is just bulkier. Yeah, so I mean, I guess, and that's probably a little bit why kind of all these 3 sort of methods kind of have their own value and will be done.
yeah.
And it's just based on how many you want to make. What's your goal? Do you want to like make one for a single Ink 28 warband? Such that it doesn't really matter. You just want it for this visual effect of being a lot more terrifying. So like,
Yeah.
I guess it might be worth mentioning that we sort of suggested that some people just doing digital sculpting and such. And honestly, I feel that Adam, if you would want to make another like true scale Marine that wasn't just using Primaris, like that's what you would probably want to do because being able to make subtle changes on like a 3D software, I think would be I mean, it would certainly be a learning experience. It would take a while to learn the software, but I think it would be easier than re-sculpting stuff again and again.
Yeah, I mean that the like the Primark scale, true scale marine that I made, like for that I made a mold to make different casts of the model and used it to make a few different models. And it was sort of under the guise that if I wanted to make more, I could take that cast, chop it up, repose it, make changes. And yeah, I've done that, but again, that still isn't easy or quick to do.
And I guess towards that, recently I saw there's a talented digital sculptor that goes by the name on Instagram, Saint Descent. She's been kind of making an effort to do some digital sculpting to make, I guess, sort of true scale Marines. And I feel her effort is a lot less the sort of proportioned realism that we're shooting for, and a lot more like, let's take that weird Karl Kapinski illustration and ramp it up. And
yeah, the notion of more of their like gorilla-esque, like really broad shoulders, huge hulking armor, kind of a small head, and I feel it does a good job of kind of sort of capturing what Kapinski had done with that one image.
I must say I'm not a big fan.
I feel the legs are just so bulky and the head's just so small. But I feel the size of them, like the notion if you compare it to a Primaris Space Marine, like maybe that's roughly the head size or like how tall maybe you would expect a Primaris Space Marine would be compared to the real Primaris Space Marines.
But I guess one of the strengths here, and we were talking about digital sculpting, I feel like if you have those files, like you could constantly sort of keep working with it and modifying stuff, and I think that that would be helpful.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like with that, there's often always kind of a notion where whatever you make, it would be, you almost sort of want to make something where you could still use at least some of the Games Workshop plastic components, like the heads and stuff like that, because there is such a large variety of models that have already been released.
That you have in your collections, most likely. You bought them and you haven't assembled them.
Yeah. Like all those Indominus models that you may have in a box somewhere and have assembled too.
Yeah, no.
Well, so maybe we've touched upon most of what we wanted to say here. Like Primaris, I don't know, overall theme, Primaris made true scaling a lot easier.
I feel made it obtainable. Brad, are you gonna rush out and start making some true scale Space Marines now?
Well, heck no, but I feel like the thing that I think is probably, and I think like when you talk about like people making their own and sculpting their own is something, but I feel like at some point these older marks are going to be hard to find bits on eBay. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that's not true, but
well, it just depends on what Forge World chooses to do. I mean,
yeah, but like when those books are over, like you think, I don't know.
I mean, they've really ramped down the release rate of those books, so I sort of feel like there's plenty of time.
When you say when those books are over, do you mean when they finish the Horus Heresy novel series? Will people still care? Is that what you mean?
More or less is kind of, and
I
like,
see what you're saying.
Will they still keep supporting, like the Horus Heresy game already operates under like 7th edition rules, right? Like it all seems a little untenable. The more and more it keeps going.
And as as people get older and the hobby community, like new people come into it that have always had Primaris and stuff, I could see the desire to have some of that stuff perhaps wane.
Yeah,
it's just embrace the shiny new Primaris models.
That's
So
right.
you don't think like the new 12-year-old getting into the hobby will read the 50 horse heresy novel?
Yeah.
Obviously, they
Also,
will.
I mean,
Space Marines are so cool. Like I wish there was more lore that I could read. Oh, 55 horse heresy novels.
Each only $16.99 a novel. Hooray!
also, one thing, the notion of like the Primaris Space Marines and like Horus Heresy. So like I've certainly done at least a little work with kind of creating older Mark armor with Primaris Marines as kind of like a template. Like I made 2 Death Guard models where I essentially just took a Primaris model and did some cutting and sculpted over top of the armor to make, like, in this case, both times, like iron armor, where you kind of resculpt some of the overlocking and interlocking armor plating to look like iron armor. So I sort of feel like this is kind of another thing, like if you're really willing and into sculpting, like you can pretty easily do stuff like that if you really want some of those older or different armor variants. Like the Primaris
Yeah,
models
Yeah,
are still a
good
great
cases.
like
It's
foundation.
just not really scalable.
There are
If this-
58 Horus heresy novels now, so if you read one a month, it would take you almost 5 years to read them all.
That's a long time.
And there, all the Siege of Terra books coming. You better get reading.
I included the one.
Oh, did you? Okay.
There are 54 before the Siege of Terra part started.
And there are a lot of novellas too, Greg.
I've read none of them.
I've read some. But
Also-
yeah, so I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. And honestly, who knows? Maybe Games Workshop down the line will start making different Primaris armor marks that
I mean, as
look
soon as they start
surprisingly
doing
like old armor.
yeah. As soon as they start doing that, people are gonna start going ballistic and like. But I mean,
Because
as
they
soon
already
as
did
soon
it,
as they
they-
do that, it's like the Horus Heresy resin range is finished.
Yeah, because they already made the beaky, the Primaris beaky helmets for
They did
the, what is it? That one upgrade sprue for the
Raven Guard.
yeah. So I mean, it's certainly, and then they made all those the Reavers, different Primaris types that people have started to use to convert scouts and things
Yeah,
like
Space
this.
Marine
So like,
scouts.
it'll be interesting to see what people start to do with some of the models. But I feel Primaris are certainly here to stay, and I feel the more you can. I mean, at least now you have a use for all those bad-looking squatty models. Like you can take their bolters or their backpacks and the Primaris models that you purchased due to the general excitement of a new 40K release and haven't done anything with. Yeah, like Brad, didn't you get a copy of Shadow's Pair and we were gonna split it or something, and it just didn't happen yet?
Well, I mean, yeah, I put together some of the chaos stuff, so I held up my side of the bargain
That's impressive.
a little bit, and I tried to drop it off to Adam like 2 weeks ago, and Adam was like, "Well, if you want to," and I said, "Well,
I don't want to do it that much.
yeah, you didn't really sell it," so I was like, "Well, I'm not delivering this." So,
But yeah, I don't know. So it'll be interesting to see what the Primaris Space Marines hold. But like, I mean, there was that old classic Chaplain on bike model that was moved into Warhammer Legends, such that they're not gonna re-update the rules. It's like, oh, that's gone, like a part of our past that will never be reclaimed. But then to now just see that, oh, they're making a Primaris version that he looks basically the same, just better.
Yeah, just a lot
Stronger.
better.
So yeah, I think
well, won't it be something like when they phase out the regular Marines and Primaris become the new norm? They're like 2 wound models, right? Like,
They are.
so you're getting a little closer to like being the super soldier of the books, right? Like,
No, I mean it's
Brad,
true.
they cost too many points, and they don't have special weapons.
well, when there isn't any old ones anymore, they'll
Yeah.
fix that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they'll add them in.
Yeah.
It's just because everyone knows that each edition there needs to be at least two Space Marine codexes, as
Mhm.
well as all the accessory Space Marine codexes.
Hell yeah.
Need to
Yep.
keep selling them.
Yeah.
But it's the people's fault. They buy them. So stop
No.
buying Space Marines.
Yeah, well, they're just so cool, Brad.
They're the coolest.
They're just so cool.
Space Marines.
Well, perhaps that could
Yeah,
be
I think we
a way to tie up this podcast.
talked about them. We talked about Space Marines, everybody, from their humble beginnings to their interesting Primaris current state.
No, I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see where Games Workshop goes. And I think, I mean, I also look forward to seeing just where the community in general takes the stuff. Because,
Mhm.
yeah, despite the Primaris arriving, I don't think it really diminished people's efforts to make true scale Marines. And if anything, it just diversified how people approach the whole process. And I look forward to seeing more with that. And I think I will certainly continue to experiment with converting other Marines, both with Primaris models, and I feel I'll probably eventually try and resculpt maybe a Primaris Space Marine in the future.
Yeah, people haven't really made true scale Primaris. Let's do it.
Untapped market.
Yeah, oh
so
my
that
goodness.
could
Who
be
wouldn't
done.
love that?
And everyone would love it. I'd love it. Well, so yeah, I don't know. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens, and I think I would say if anyone is sort of on the fence about making true scale Space Marines, I think at the very least it's a worthwhile endeavor, just as kind of like a learning experience, to try and create your own true scale Space Marine, whether it be you taking one of the old spindly bad looking Space Marines and extending and bulking them out. Like, doing any of that stuff I think is kind of a good exercise, and it'll sort of force you as a hobbyist to experiment with a lot of different techniques and sculpting.
Mhm.
And most of the time the sculpting is often easier, since it's just you're sculpting large flat plates, so it kind of
And I
leaves
think
a
it
lot of
also,
room.
with things like Kill Team and maybe this 9th edition Crusades or whatever, there's another smaller scale thing. There's
don't-
still potentially avenues to use those models if you do want to play games and such. So yeah,
So get
lots
out
of-
there,
lots of
start making
opportunity.
your own true scale Space Marines or true scale Primaris Space Marines. We
Mhm.
want to see it. Brad, we expect you to get in on this too.
You know, you're talking, and I'm starting to think like true scaling might be for me. But I think I need to focus my energy on some true scale orcs.
Yeah.
That's something that should happen, and I think at one point I would like to put at least some effort into doing that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
because they're
And-
too weedy right now.
They
Oh,
really
it
are. And I
breaks
mean,
my heart.
eventually Games Workshop is probably going to just redesign the entire orc range.
Yep, I'm right. I'm here for
The
it.
beast arises.
Yep, they need it.
Yeah.
They need it.
Well, I guess maybe at that we can call this episode to a close. Thanks, Brad, for joining us and giving us sort of your input in the matter. And I guess everybody, thank you for listening. Let us know if you have any comments. You can easily contact us through Instagram or comment on the YouTube version of this, as well as easier than like the podcast. But yeah, thanks everybody for taking the time and listening to this, and we will talk to you again soon.
We did it.
All right, there's that podcast. Meandering Shade's making a true scale marine, I see.
That's
school
nice.
style, starting with Terminator legs.
Yeah, I feel that's a good place to start, and I'd sort of encourage anyone to try and do that, because
after you do that, realize how much of a pain it is. You'll be like, well, I could use the Primaris.
yeah, well, like, I did one. No, I mean, I think it's a good experience, and I've certainly learned a lot with sculpting and just making models from that process. And I mean, I guess the first true scale marine, which we talked a little bit about in the podcast, was like an Alpha Legion Space Marine that I ended up sending to Migs at Iron Sleet. And for that model, I took
Terminator stuff.
Yeah, like
Well,
Terminator
actually,
stuff.
Brad,
and
Yeah.
what do you think about, you mentioned about orcs needing to be true scaled. What do you think Games Workshop will do? Like if they do decide they want to redesign orcs, I almost think they will almost have to do like, we're making Beaster Eyes models. We have these cool novels
Well, you
should
don't
read.
have to, right? Because like they're supposed to be
Be of
big.
different sizes.
yeah, they're supposed to be
But
all.
but I kind of still think they will want to make different rules to say like those are regular orcs, but like the warp has supercharged
These
orc
are
anatomy.
40K
The
black
fungus have
orcs.
gone wild, spreading spores, and now they're bigger than ever, such that you have the uber knobs. Like I feel they will
Yeah.
still want
that's what's
the-
gonna
like
happen.
they'll still want to
Because-
sell those old models.
That's the rub, right? Like they just did the plastic mega knob. What just right? But like they made the plastic mega knobs. They're still kind of
Mm-hmm.
small, and like yeah, you look at like the regular plastic knobs now, and you're like, well, they're probably should be boy size. Like those are boy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, even Gazcall, it's a big model, but his head's so small that he kind of seems like he's not big.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Which is, or I guess, I mean, admittedly, isn't that large, which I think was kind of weird.
yeah. So they didn't really like. I feel like that might have been a chance to signal that like orcs are bigger and badder, and yeah, it feels like he's kind of a smaller orc in a mech suit.
Yeah, that their talented mechs can make do for the fact that they're being passed by bigger things like Primaris.
yeah. It's just really kind of, I don't know, soured me on orcs. I'm too bitter about that stuff, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, I love orcs, but
I like
yeah.
the Ascall model.
Well, I mean, to be honest, even for the orcs in Age of Sigmar, when they're like, let's make new orcs for Age of Sigmar, well, we'll just make a new faction called Iron Jaws or something to make like what we think a boy should look like, but we'll still sell the other ones. But really, if you want to play orcs in Age of Sigmar, you should buy new orcs. They're bigger and they're cooler, and that I feel that's what they will do.
Yeah,
that's what they'll do.
Which I guess, like, would you use them for the basis if you wanted to do a true scale?
Probably.
That would be the easiest thing to do. Yes.
They're kind of weird though. Like their
armor is such that it you wouldn't want, or I think that's what you probably need to do, but there's not a good thing to base it off because the orcs, they're so different. They are more of like the gorilla sort of thing.
Yeah.
And like it would be
harder
I feel
like
to sculpt
especially are like kind of like hunched over where like when you look at like kind of like knobs, who I think they're not quite as bulky, but they're kind of as tall.
Mm-hmm.
They don't quite look like that, so you kind of like, I feel like you can't mix and match body types so much
No.
Yeah.
You got to say like, I'm taking the big hulky orcs, or I'm taking the.
Well, yeah, because even those big hulky orcs, like their heads are like smaller than regular orc boys, or about the
Almost.
same size.
They're
but
they're pretty
their
close.
bodies and their muscles. So like, I feel it's kind of been Brian Nelson slightly perfecting the orc physiology, but then it's sort of inconsistent throughout the range.
Because
So
their war boss model is really cool. I know you put one together.
The Mega
yeah,
Boss.
I love that model.
I put one
It's-
together.
It's
Oh,
awesome.
there's a bug in here. Look out! That's a.
Wanted to hear about Space Marines, Brad.
Yeah, it's a little something special for the Twitch viewers.
Yeah. No.
Which I don't think is any, but
I wonder, are the Necrons any bigger?
I think they are. I think they're.
It's a new GW model, has to be bigger.
Yeah. I'm
So
pretty
in
sure
that
they are.
sense, that's surprising that they're literally like, we're just making the Necron Warriors. I mean, I guess maybe it's just the Necron Warrior is such an old model, which
They're
I guess admittedly
squatting. The old
orc-
Necron Warriors were squatting like the old Space Marines. So these new ones, maybe they're the same size. It's just they're standing up a little straighter.
They're a little upright. Yeah.
the squatting legacy has changed.
It's getting better and better. But so I guess that reminds me, I want to go. So the models in general, Games Workshop has been getting better and better at, I think better and better at posing them, at least to a certain degree. But despite that, every release and every new squad, I feel they always have at least one model where the pose is just that ridiculous. Like it's like remarkable. And the Sister Battle squad, let's see if I can get a picture of it to actually show. In the standard Battle Sister squad, they have one. Yeah, I think I have a picture of it now. One of the sets of legs, the model has her legs spread out so wide in like the craziest bracing stance you've ever seen, and I just don't understand it. I don't understand how they thought that was okay.
Had to keep that legacy.
And maybe that was it. Because like most of the other sets of legs in the set, they're pretty good. Like they're standing up pretty relatively tall, but this one, it's so ridiculous.
Where they're like actually kind of jogging or striding. Like they're a lot better than I feel many other GW models, but that one is a notable.
I find it baffling.
Hey, Frank, I want to go to bed. I need to go to bed.
No, I understand. We could probably actually just think of calling the stream to a close. We've been at this for a while, and I think, dare I say, we've talked enough about Space Marines. Like, maybe we won't have to.
We can never talk enough about Space Marines, Adam.
Maybe we don't have to talk about them again for a year.
We will always talk about Space Marines. Next Primaris release, we'll talk about them.
I mean, it's coming soon.
I'm rocking out of here. It's been real. Thanks for joining us, Brad.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
See you, Greg.
Later.
Yep, see you, Greg. So how's everyone else feeling? I mean, I feel we could probably also call the stream to a close. Like,
I'm fine with that.
I mean, I think all of us have work tomorrow.
Yes, all of us.
Yeah.
And if not, I'm sure people are excited to get into creating their own true scale Space Marines. So big plans, lots of stuff to do.
Yeah,
lots of stuff to do. So yeah, thanks everybody for joining us on this stream. Thanks for your questions, comments, etc. It's been fun. We will certainly stream sometime next time, same time next week. hopefully I'll have more Space Marines to show.
Space Marines.
No, actually, maybe I'll show some Blood Bowl stuff. We'll see. Because Blood Bowl still needs to
Crazy.
happen. Yeah.
I'm pumped about Blood Bowl.
Yeah, and I'm actually pretty excited too. But yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. We will talk to you again soon. Keep safe, keep on enjoying the hobby, whatever aspect of it is, whether it's painting, sculpting, assembling, playing the game, reading the books, creating your own fiction novels, whatever. Have fun with it. We'll talk to you again soon.